Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Meet the Expert event. I'm Mark Hodson with the Buena Vista Museum. Today, we're here with Dr. Lucas Hall. Today, he will be speaking to us about urban carnivores here in California's Central Valley, known to many as the San Joaquin Valley. Dr. Hall completed his PhD in 2016, and after a postdoctoral fellowship and a stint at Claremont College, he joined Cal State Bakersfield in 2019. There, he is a conservation biologist and works primarily on the conservation of the endangered San Joaquin kit fox. Dr. Hall has been interested in animals since his early childhood in South Texas, Southern Nevada, and Southern Utah. He particularly enjoys reptiles, but his mother objected strenuously to the presence of newts, snakes, and lizards in her house. He initially envisioned a career of traveling the world, sharing cool animals with his own TV series, but was caught up soon enough with the fascination of studying animals in more detail. Now, before we get started, I'd like to let you know that if you like today's event and you'd like to see more content like this from the Buena Vista Museum, I invite you all to make a donation. You can make a donation to the museum anytime at buenavistamuseum.org/donate. I'll put that address in the chat. Also, if you would be so kind to make sure you keep your devices muted, and if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat window. There should be a chat button on your screen, so just click that, and we will get to those questions as we proceed. Without further ado, I welcome Dr. Hall.
All right, welcome everybody. And so, like I was introduced, we're going to be talking today about urban carnivores, and these are ones that you may or may not be familiar with here in Bakersfield and in other areas of the Central Valley. But just to give you a backdrop of what I'd like to spend my time on today is we'll talk about urban carnivores. What is an urban carnivore? Why is an urban carnivore? And then we're going to get into some of the research that we're doing in my research lab on urban carnivores, with particular emphasis and focus on the San Joaquin kit fox, our endangered species of carnivore here in the valley. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen with everybody. Going back to COVID days. All right. All right, so the title I have for today is Interactions Between Urban Carnivores in Bakersfield. And again, with special kind of focus or emphasis on our endangered San Joaquin kit fox. And I am an assistant professor of biology here at CSUB. Been here for a few years and love it so far. Hope they let me stay on for a few more. All right, so what exactly is an urban carnivore? Now, the way that I envision this to kind of play out is similar to how my lectures play out. And lectures, usually in person, people are shouting answers, raising hands and stuff like that, but we're not in person. And so use the chat box. If you have questions, if you have answers, use the chat box. So the question posed, what exactly is an urban carnivore? And I can sit here in awkward silence all day. I don't have a problem at all. No one's gonna, oh, here we go. Oh, we got it. We got a plug there from the Buena Vista Museum. Buena Vista Museum says rats. Okay, rats potentially, right? Any other ideas? What is an urban carnivore? Oh, Rebecca says a carnivore that has to adapt to humans. Okay, that is a good description there. Another says cats, garbage eaters. Now, why don't we get into some potential examples of what an urban carnivore is? And so here we have a picture of, oh, there we go. Got a picture of one here. Anyone know what this urban carnivore is? Go ahead and put your answer in the chat box. Got an evil squirrel. Yeah. What kind of squirrel is this? And does anyone know that? It is a ground squirrel. Yes. So this is the first urban carnivore we're going to be talking about. No, I'm just kidding. This isn't an urban carnivore. Squirrels aren't carnivores. These guys eat seeds and other things. They'll eat garbage and stuff like that. So this is not an urban carnivore. So when we are talking about urban carnivores, what are we talking about? Squirrels, we have lots of squirrels. Definitely an urban mammal here in a lot of urban environments, but not a carnivore. And so what is an example of an urban carnivore? Someone has mentioned cats already once. Show a picture of some cats here. Got a few different cats. This is a good example of an urban carnivore, but stepping back to what is a carnivore in general, a carnivore is something that eats meat. It doesn't only have to eat meat, but primarily focuses or has a meat-centered diet. Now, cats are a good example of an urban carnivore. We don't think about them as urban carnivores, though. We think about them as our house cats, and they just kind of do their thing, but they are a very, very important urban carnivore. Now, when I use the word important, not necessarily good, but they do have an impact on the urban environment in terms of what they're eating, when they're eating it, and so forth. Another example of an urban carnivore is these guys here. What do we got a picture of here? Chat box is surprisingly quiet. You guys need to get brave. Cute dogs. Yeah, cute dogs. So dogs, domestic dogs, similar to cats, domestic dogs are also examples of urban carnivores. They live in the urban environment. They mostly have a meat-centered or at least a meat-preferred diet. In fact, our dogs are not too far distantly related to wolves. They're really closely related. In fact, technically, they're the same species. Dogs are a different subspecies than wolves. And so super closely related. And so we'd expect with that close relation that they're also going to be probably heavy meat eaters. And dogs, given the time of day, are going to eat meat, right? We tend to just feed them dog food, but most of that has a lot of ground up meat or protein components to it. But dogs, another important urban carnivore. Again, that we don't really think about as an urban carnivore because they're our pets, right? We think about it as our pets, but cats can get away and they become feral. Dogs can get away from the care of humans and also become feral. And it, in those stages, can play really, really significant roles in the ecology of other urban carnivores. All right, let's keep going. We got the trash panda, right? The raccoon is another, what we consider to be an urban carnivore. And so far, all of these species we've seen are urban carnivores that we find here in Bakersfield and throughout other parts of the Central Valley. The ground squirrel, of course, was not an urban carnivore, but still an urban species. One that's also a pretty big component of kit fox diets that we've learned. Kit foxes do eat quite a bit of squirrels. And right now, this seems to be kind of a boom year for squirrel populations. And so their numbers go up and foxes are going to be taking advantage of that. But so we have raccoons here. Another urban carnivore that we've detected is this. What's this guy? Someone send me a chat. What is this thing? Yeah, we have an opossum here, Virginia opossum. We will be circling back round to talking about possums, but these guys are also considered part of what we call the carnivore guild. They're not in the carnivore family in mammals, or at least carnivore order, excuse me, taxonomically, but they do have a strong meat-based preference in their diet. We got another one here. We got our striped skunk. This is another example of an urban carnivore. Some of you guys might have seen some of these running around at night around town. You can almost any given night here on campus, if you go out, you can find at least one skunk running around. But these guys are also been able to move into urban environments quite well and are quite successful. And a lot of it has to do with they just don't care about anything else, right? Anything can come at them, and they're really well defended. All right, next up, what do we got here? What's this guy or gal? Wiley. We have a coyote. Yeah, and the coyotes, while not super common in our urban environment here in Bakersfield, are very, very prominent in Southern California. I worked in Southern California from 2017 to 19, and it was not uncommon to see a coyote just kind of roaming the streets in the evening. And so also another species that has made its way into the urban environment. And another one here. Anyone take a stab at this guy? Things are going to get a little tougher moving forward here. Oh, bam. Oh, Nora. Yes, Nora with the red fox. Nora should know this as well. Nora is one of the researchers on our urban kit fox project, and the campus that she manages at Highland High School got a picture of a red fox on our camera there. So that was pretty cool. So good job, Nora. Nora learned and Nora remembered. What about this? Any guesses on this type of fox? No guesses yet? No one's going to take a stab? Black-tip tail fox? Red tail fox? This is, eastern gray fox. Oh, Michael says gray fox. This is a gray fox. Now, gray foxes are similar to, they're a little bit smaller than red foxes, and you can see some obvious differences. Usually your red foxes, they're going to have kind of black booties, what we call black booties, around their feet. They have a white tip tail. They're generally reddish, but that can vary to kind of brown or tan. You might even get some silver mottling in their coat. But red foxes are generally larger than your gray foxes. Your gray fox has a characteristic strong black dorsal stripe. So that's a stripe on the top of its tail, and it terminates in a black tip. And they're mostly mottled gray, but as you'll see, this fox looks kind of similar to this fox here. Anyone take a stab at what this fox is? Oh, someone says San Joaquin kit fox. That's not a bad guess, but it's not correct. I done tricked you guys. I should give you a hint. What other fox might this be? Any true fox lovers in the audience? No? Oh, Kyle says island fox. That's a good guess. The island fox is actually more closely related. The island fox is in the same genus as our gray fox. Our gray foxes are mainland species of gray fox. The island fox is essentially the island species of gray fox. Different subspecies, or excuse me, different species, but same genus. And so pretty closely related. Yeah, this guy is our swift fox. Swift foxes and kit foxes are very, very closely related. Very closely related. In fact, their geographic ranges even nearly touch. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But you can get, we don't get swift foxes here in Bakersfield. So this guy's just, I'm just throwing everyone off to make sure everyone's awake. But this is our San Joaquin kit fox. And we do get these in the urban environment. In fact, they have demonstrated to survive quite well in an urban environment. And we're going to talk about some of those reasons why that might be. But so these are a bunch of different urban carnivores that we do see in our research, except for our swift fox, right? We don't see those. We shouldn't be seeing any swift foxes over here in the Central Valley. But let's talk a little bit about our the geographic ranges here of our swift fox and our kit fox. So here on the left-hand side, in the lighter gray, we have our kit fox. Let's see. This would be where our kit foxes live, in this gray here, and over here on the right is where our swift foxes live. And so swift foxes are pretty much kind of our Midwest down into kind of northern Texas, southern Canada. They occupy a lot of the grassland areas in the Midwest. Our kit foxes are, again, they get close, but most of what separates them are mountainous regions. You have the Rocky Mountains kind of coming down through here, keeping these two different species separate. But on the right here, trying to figure out exactly what this distribution or the range looks like for the kit fox, it's a little unclear and coming into focus a little more as we research more and more. But we have a historic range that was published back in 1979, what you see in yellow. And then we have in blue what was different from that was published more recently, about 8 years ago. And then green is what you see in the overlap. And so takeaway from this is green is probably the best bet for your ranges. Now, these different numbers, these all pertain to different subspecies of kit foxes. And so you'll see that we have a 4 here. This is our San Joaquin kit fox, but that's different than our traditional desert kit fox up here in the Mojave Desert. And it's even different than the one you see in Southern California and moving into Arizona, and lastly down into Mexico and Baja California. But we have kit foxes occupying, or at least different subspecies of them occupying much of our Southwest. Now, most kit fox habitat looks pretty, what we call homogeneous. It's very similar. It's just kind of a repeat or copy and paste and repeat across the whole landscape. And so here we have a greasewood. It's a very common, especially in the Great Basin Desert, very common type of kit fox habitat. One thing that you will notice as we transition through some of these slides is that usually kit foxes are occupying big flat spaces with very low vegetation. In fact, I don't know if you guys can see, does anyone see the kit fox in this picture? Barely. I'll go ahead and circle it here. Let's see. Yeah, right here we got a desert kit fox right there in the middle. And so they do a good job at hiding out, but some of that also plays into when they're active. And we'll talk about that in a moment, but primarily nocturnal. You don't see them all that often during the day. So we got some greasewood here. We got some sagebrush. This is also some other potential kit fox habitat. Again, you'll notice it's very similar to what we saw previous, big flat expanses, kind of low growing shrubs. And these would both be kind of natural kit fox habitats, but they even do pretty well in, less well though, they don't do as well in invaded habitats. And so much of what you see here is an invasive grass. So an invasive species of grass, you'll notice that the shrub species are very few and far between. And so one of the main challenges that we face with kit foxes, and with many species, but kit foxes in this case, is the idea of habitat loss via invasive species. In this case, we have, this is a type of bromus grass or cheatgrass. And this kind of grass can really homogenize the landscape. It takes what was normally a lot of variation in the habitat, and it can really just cut that down into just a grassland. And these foxes still can do okay in a grassland, but they really start becoming affected when different items that they eat are impacted by some of these invasive species. And so rodents, for example, which are a pretty big component of kit fox diet, rodents don't do extremely well in cheatgrass areas. And so if you have fewer rodents there, you're going to have fewer kit foxes. And so while they can run around the grass just fine, you might not be able to stake out a good life in an invasive grass area because of the way that it can affect their diet. Another really cool thing about kit foxes, I've been working with kit foxes since 2010, and some of my earlier work with kit foxes was determining how water fits into their ecology. Now, if I were to ask anybody in this room, if you were to go out into the desert, what's the first thing you would pack? Go ahead and send that to the chat box. What's the first thing you would take with you if you were going out to hike around in the desert for the day? Very first thing that comes to mind. All right, a lot of people chiming in. Well, we got a few people chiming in. I guess that's not a lot, but we got water, and someone said hat. Yeah, absolutely. Hat, absolutely. But like most of you guys picked up, water would be something that you would take with you if you were going to hike around the desert for the day. Now, what's interesting is when we think about desert adapted species that have evolved in these arid environments for a really long period of time, they often evolve in the absence or near absence of water. And so if I were to ask you how much water you think a kit fox drinks, you're probably prepping to prepare to say probably not a lot if they've lived in deserts their whole entire existence. And that's what we see. They don't need to drink a lot of water. In fact, kit foxes, there was some really cool research done back in the early 80s demonstrating that they don't need to drink water to survive in the desert, which is pretty crazy. I mean, because we think, how can you survive without water in the desert? Like if we were to go to the desert, we would have to have water. These guys can do without it. Anyone have any idea why? What can they do? How can they survive without water? See, does anyone have any guesses? Oh, Rebecca, that is a very good comment there. Fluids from their prey. They avoid the sun. They don't sweat. These are all great ways to adapt to live in an arid environment. So let's start with fluids from their prey. A lot of mammals particularly, but a lot of organisms are majority water. Most vertebrates are at least 60% water and above. We're what? I mean, we're somewhere 60 or 70, 75% water. I can't remember what it was. We have a lot of water content. And so by kit foxes eating things like little desert cottontail rabbits or kangaroo rats or what have you, they can take in the water from that animal. And what these researchers did in the 80s, they found that a kit fox, to survive the day, the kit fox, to get just the amount of energy it needs to survive the day, it needs to eat 2 kangaroo rats. So 2 kangaroo rats, it now has enough energy to complete its daily activities. to live till the next day. To meet its daily water requirements, it needs to eat 2 more kangaroo rats. And so if a kit fox can eat 4 kangaroo rats, it's good. It's had its food and its drink for the day, and it's done. However, has anyone in here ever tried to catch a kangaroo rat by hand? I have. It's not easy. Those little buggers are very erratic in the way they jump back and forth and all over the place. It's hard to catch them. Hard to catch them. Now, kit foxes are better than we are at catching kangaroo rats, but still, it's probably even challenging for them. Sarah can't even catch her hamster in his cage. Yeah, so now imagine trying to catch 4 kangaroo rats every night just so that you don't need to go find a drink of water. So what we found in some of our previous research with desert kit foxes was that while they have the physiological capability of not drinking water, so they don't have to drink water, when presented with water, guess what they do? Let's watch a little video here. So we got a video of a kit fox. It's at a man-made water source. This is a water source that's designed for things like chukar and quail, desert species of birds. And this is what we call an earthen tank guzzler or water source. And so it's a big cement reservoir, essentially, that's buried kind of ground level. And so to get water, the animals have to squeeze between these little metal bars. This keeps things like livestock and deer and sheep and stuff like that out of the water source. So they squeeze through the bar and then they can get access to the water. And so here we have a kit fox, desert kit fox. Now, up until like the 2000s, up until almost 2010, the operating knowledge, kind of the general assumption we had about kit foxes was that they don't drink water. They don't need it. The scientific papers, the studies that were done in the 80s demonstrated that they don't need it. If they eat just a little bit more, they don't need water. So this is some of the video evidence that we captured, and we captured a lot of it. And so this kit fox, he goes in, kind of doubles back, but then he starts drinking. And he's just drinking away. You see him just lapping that water up. You'll see maybe you can see the progress bar here on this, but we're 19, 20 seconds into the video, still drinking. Coming up on, he gets tired, so he decides to sit down and continue drinking, and the video ends, and still drinking. And so this taught us something pretty cool about kit foxes. So while they do have that ability to not drink water because they can eat more, it might make sense if you have water nearby to actually drink it, because by doing that, you don't have to chase down an extra 2 kangaroo rats every night, which again, I chased kangaroo rats down before and they are hard to catch. But the idea of having to catch double the amount just to meet your water requirements or walk over to a water source and get a drink seems like a no-brainer, which is kind of what we think is going on here with the foxes. And so really interesting stuff that we've learned about foxes over the last decade in terms of how they interact with kind of natural resources in their environment and other species. But how does this spill into the urban environment? The question I want to pose to everyone right now is, how does a carnivore become an urban carnivore? And so think about some of the carnivores that we've seen so far in these slides. How'd they become urban carnivores? Any ideas there? Oh, Rebecca says we invade their habitat. That's actually a very, very important way that a carnivore becomes an urban carnivore. We just move into their natural habitat. We make it urban. They just don't go away. They just figure out how to live around us. Urban wildland interface. Yes, exactly. Right along there. Readily available food, water, protection from predators. Yes, those are potential attractants to the urban environment. Sarah says they acclimated to their new environment and changed their diet maybe. Yeah, we've definitely seen some of that. So we were talking about all those other urban carnivores before, and there was one in there, the opossum. Does anyone know anything about the opossum? Where is the opossum native? Is it native here to California? What about domestic cats and domestic dogs? Are they native to California? They're not, right? And so some carnivores become urban carnivores because we bring them to the urban environment. Your cats, your dogs, Virginia opossum. Those things are native to the Southeast US. How'd they get over here? They pretty much hitched a ride with us. And so they become present in the urban environment. And so you can become an urban carnivore a couple of different ways. One of them is humans, we build our urban environment and you just happen to be there and you don't want to go, you become an urban carnivore. Another way is you are an introduced species to the area and you just particularly do well in and around humans, and you can become an urban carnivore. And so when we think about urban carnivores, they don't always have the same origin. And some of them do better around us than others. Like coyotes, for example, they do okay in the urban environment, but they don't prefer it. Our kit foxes here in the San Joaquin Valley actually do surprisingly well in an urban environment, but that doesn't mean that they don't have issues. Our poor little precious kit fox, for example, this guy is a kit fox is a carnivore, but it is on the bottom of the totem pole in terms of carnivores. All the other carnivores above it can kick its butt. And so our little San Joaquin kit fox these are just natural predators we're going to show up here. Coyotes. Coyotes are one of the most important predators of kit foxes. Golden eagles are another important predator of kit foxes, and flying bobcats, the ones that fly, specifically the ones that fly like in this picture. No, I'm just kidding, right? But bobcats are also another important predator of kit foxes. Now, this is all fine and dandy. Kit foxes have evolved in the presence of these species over a good deal amount of time. They use, and we have a lot of research that backs this up, they use the landscape in a dynamic fashion that allows them to minimize or reduce the possibility that they have of encountering predators. Because if they encounter any of these three animals that we see on our screen here, they're dead. A bobcat will kill them and eat them. A golden eagle will kill them and eat them. A coyote will kill them but not eat them. They kill them because they're competitors. So just kill them and leave them. But the point is, the same result happens each time. You end up with a dead kit fox. And so kit foxes, to avoid death, use that landscape carefully so that they can not become a meal or at least something dead. The problem that we face here in the urban environment is these interactions that happen between species. That's what interspecific means. So interactions between like kit foxes and bobcats or kit foxes and coyotes are likely complicated in novel or new environments with novel species. And so kit foxes are somewhat used to bobcats and golden eagles, and they've had time to wrestle with coyotes. But what do they do with things like cats? Cats are really new to the landscape for kit foxes. What do they do with possums and raccoons? Those are animals that they haven't really had to deal with over their evolutionary upbringing, so to speak. And so one of the main things that we want to study, and that we have been studying for the last couple of years in our lab, is we want to look at how the presence of possible competitors to kit foxes and potential predators how they affect the way that kit foxes use the landscape spatially and temporally. And what that means is affect where they occur on the landscape and when they occur on the landscape. And so to set this study up, we have some predictions that we would assume, if our hypothesis is correct, that competitors and predators influence the way that these animals use the landscape, that larger dominant species, things like coyotes and dogs and stuff like that, are going to be affecting the kit fox probably more than things like cats and skunks and stuff. But again, the way that we're setting our research up is to determine if any of these species are affecting our little endangered San Joaquin kit fox. And so to set this up, this project, we set up cameras. Each one of these red dots is a location for a camera. This is our Taft College camera, our Arvin camera. This is CSUB. We have 9 cameras. Bakersfield College, we had 4 cameras, and then all these other single white or red dots are all high schools in the Kern High School District. And so we had a camera set up at all of these campuses, and we monitored them from September 2020, starting September 2020 to May, and then the next year, this last year, September to May of 2022. And in this time, we have collected a bunch of pictures. We're still sorting through a lot of them. But this is what we do to figure out where the carnivores are active. We set up a camera. This is our camera here. And we direct it at a can of cat food. Now, this can of cat food isn't something we just pop open and let the animals come and eat freely. You'll notice that there's just 4 little holes, and that's just for them to get a smell or a whiff of potential food, and then they come and investigate. And when they investigate it, our camera gets pictures. And so every 2 weeks, we had our baits replenished at all these campuses. We had a bunch of students involved in this research, and they would diligently go attend their campus and replace their bait so that we could continue our project. We used some fancy statistics. I won't bore you with the details right now, but to determine whether or not any of these interactions are going on, we looked at how they overlap, how kit foxes overlap in terms of how they use the time of the day with other species, and we'll get into more of that. I did want to give you just a close-up picture of our cat food design here, and all that delicious gravy just pouring out. They love this stuff. We used 5 different flavors of cat food because that's also something that we're interested in doing. If we're trying to figure out where we can detect kit foxes, understanding if there's a difference in preference of flavors is something we're obviously interested in. And so every time we put out a new cat food, we would record the flavor, and then we'd pin it down to the ground with a giant landscape spike. This landscape spike's about 10 inches tall, pretty big nail. And that's to keep animals from running away with our bait, keep it pinned down. So we did all this. We generated some preliminary results from this research. So here we have the 6 main species of urban carnivore that we detected in our study. See that kit foxes we detected the most of, over 2,000 visits of kit foxes, almost 1,000 visits of domestic cats. And then next up would be skunks, possums, raccoons, domestic dogs, and coyotes didn't make it in this analysis, or red fox. They came a little bit after we generated these plots here, but we do have coyotes, we do have red fox, and I think a student mentioned a possible gray fox on one of our one of the campuses around the edge of town. And so quite a few different species of carnivores here in our urban environment in Bakersfield. Now, we got some fancy numbers here. Don't really worry about all that. But what I do want to touch on is the idea of the temporal overlap of kit foxes with other urban carnivores. And so here we have temporal overlap of kit foxes with cats, domestic cats. And we see that anywhere you see gray, that's where you have overlap. between the two species. And so cats are the dashed line, foxes are the solid line. And so they're both primarily nocturnal and a good deal of overlap. And so this is suggesting that kit foxes and cats are probably not fighting over time of day. If you were fighting with someone, if you were truly competing with someone else for something, truly competing, you're going to try to avoid them. Because now we think of competition like boxing matches and basketball games, and it's head-to-head conflict and contact. That's not how competition works in the real world. Animals can't, if they get their leg broken or they get injured in a fight or a scuffle, it's not like they can just be like, okay, well, I'm just going to go to the doctor and get it patched up. They don't have a doctor out in the world, excuse me, out in the wild. We have vets, we can take care of our domesticated animals, but wild animals don't have that. And so they try to avoid conflict. And so when we're looking at potential competition between different species, we try to see if they're avoiding each other. And so here we see that cats and kit foxes are not really avoiding each other in time, which is suggesting that cats might not be that much of a strong competitor with kit foxes. Here we have dogs. We have a lot less overlap. And so we have less gray than we did with the cats. And so we're seeing differences here in the time of activity of both of these species, which doesn't mean that they're competing. It's just, if they were competing, this is what we'd expect to see them to be, the kit foxes particularly, to be minimizing the amount of time that they are active when dogs are also active. Here, this is one of my favorite pictures, kind of possum showing us all of his beautiful dental work here. Possums, we see moderate overlap between kit fox activity and of course possum activity. Both of these species, again, are primarily nocturnal. Raccoons, similar. We see similar patterns. We got moderate to high levels of overlap, again, suggesting that probably not strong competitors with raccoons. And skunks, similar story, at least in terms of time over the course of the day. These species are generally active at the same time. And so indicating they might not be that strong of competitors, at least over time. Do have a fun little video here now that I've dredged on about stats and everything. Got a video we picked up here on campus. This is a video between a skunk and a kit fox. They're at a cat food can. You can't see it. But as you could see in that video, who was doing the chasing? Who do you think gets to eat the cat food when they want it? The skunk or the kit fox? Who gets to eat the cat food? Or not eat it, they just get to sniff it. They can't eat it, the holes are too small. The skunk, right? Kit fox jumps in, tries to get access to the site. The skunk raises his tail and it's like, nope, you're done. You're out of here. And so this again is just kind of fortifying what I was sharing earlier, that kit foxes are really at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to the carnivore guild, both wild carnivore guild and what we're seeing here in the urban environment as well. Skunks are smaller than kit foxes too, on average. And but nothing messes with a skunk. Nothing messes with a skunk. All right, now we talked about kind of the potential competition that we see, or lack of competition that we see over time. Let's talk about space for a moment. Now, we got a bunch of information here, a bunch of numbers, a bunch of statistics. I don't want to talk specifically about these numbers, but what I do want to share with you guys is what this means. Okay, and what this means is that in our best model, our best statistical models that we created, this was our best model. It had temperature in it, cat, dog, opossum, raccoon, and skunk. This was our best model. These were all important factors that determined the spatial occurrence of kit foxes. In fact, this model alone accounted for 75% of all the model weight that we see. This next model, temperature and skunk, accounted for 13%. That was the next best model. This one clearly is our runaway model here. And so all of these components, so it's kind of stepping back to what influences activity of kit foxes, we can see that it's somewhat complicated, right? It's not just one thing. It's not just one species. It's multiple species. And we can delve into this model and look inside and kind of get some additional information on, whoops. There we go. Hit the wrong arrow there. We can get an idea of how those different components of those models are affecting kit foxes. But something really cool that we did find in our analysis is that chicken was their preferred bait flavor of cat food. Chicken had a positive estimate associated with it, and it was significant. So chicken. So if you had to go sample for kit foxes, you're going to probably want to use chicken, cat food, to attract them. And I say that, and you're probably thinking, why am I ever going to do that? Well, this summer, we're going to be catching kit foxes and collaring them, and then we're going to track them back to their dens and put a camera on their den and track movement in and out of their dens. And one way that you catch kit foxes is you put out these traps and you bait them. And this informs us, the results that we produced in the lab just this last year inform us that if we're going to use cat food, chicken might be a good flavor to use. Minimum temperature, there was a negative association with that. They didn't like it really cold. Rebecca says the neighbors lost their chickens to kit foxes. It was a massacre. Salmon and turkey, a little less so. In fact, salmon and turkey both had negative. Like kit foxes didn't like them. Cats, you'll see that there wasn't a positive or negative effect on kit foxes. Dogs, there was a negative effect, and it was strong. They had a strong negative effect. So what this tells us is that where dogs occur, kit foxes did not like to occur there as well. And so they tried to avoid those areas. Possums, there's a negative relationship there, not as strong as dogs. Raccoons, a negative one, but not as strong as dogs. And there was a positive one with skunks, really positive, really significant. They really like where skunks are. And this is pretty cool because we found in previous research where we're studying the desert kit fox up in the Mojave and Great Basin deserts, we don't have a lot of skunks in the desert, but we do have a lot of badgers. And kit foxes, we found the same results with badgers. And what do badgers and skunks have in common? Does anyone know? Any ideas? What might a badger and a skunk have in common? No one? Striped fur? Yeah, they do. They both have striped fur. Badgers have a striped black and white face. Skunks, of course, have the black and white body and face as well. And that usually the black and white, what does that mean in nature? What is that signal? Orneriness? Yeah, right. Danger? Absolutely. And so anytime you see contrasting colors out in the wild, it's usually to get your attention, to leave it alone. And so skunks, the reason why we don't mess with skunks is because we don't want to stink for the next week. Why might we not want to mess with badgers? Honey badger just don't care. Yeah, badgers are ferocious. Those things are little terrors. Nothing messes with badgers. Nothing messes with badgers. And so something that we're hoping to clarify a little further as we continue to do this research are things like skunks and badgers, while a kit fox isn't going to try to tangle with them, and if it is, it's going to be careful, like we saw in the skunk video, right? The skunk raises its tail, the kit fox is like, okay, you win, you can have the cat food. but there's a sense of security in that, right? If you're hanging around skunks and badgers, you're not messing with them, but you're hanging around them, you might be avoiding possible confrontations with other species that skunks and badgers might be repelling. And so they might almost, kit foxes might be using skunks as badgers. It's kind of like this like shield almost. Anyhow, pretty cool stuff. We're hoping to clarify a little bit more of that as we collect more information, but really cool to think about. All right, so some kind of broad conclusions based on our preliminary data analysis. We saw substantial spatial and temporal overlap. So kit fox is using the same space and the same time with most other carnivores. The effects of other carnivores on kit foxes were mixed. We saw a strong negative effect from dogs. We saw a positive effect from skunks. We saw a complete neutral effect with cats. Slightly negative effect with possums and raccoons, but mixed. Our findings partially do support our hypothesis that these other carnivores do affect when and where kit foxes pop up, just not in the way that we would have expected. Particularly with our competitors. We thought that kit foxes are likely competitors with all the other species we studied, yet they get along with some of them better than others. Predators, on the other hand, things like domestic dogs, things that can straight up kill the kit fox, they try to avoid those. That to the best of their ability, they try to avoid them. And that's what our findings are proposing, which is pretty cool. All right, with that, I have talked enough. And so if there's time for any questions, I would love to answer them. We could do this. Who are bats considered urban carnivores? Bats are urban insectivores, but insects are, I mean, technically carnivores. Let's see, it seems like there's a smaller population of kit foxes on the CSUB campus. Is there a reason? Surprisingly, kit foxes are rebounding quite well. So one thing I didn't talk about was kit foxes do pretty well in the urban environment, but one thing that almost caused them to go extinct here in the urban environment just this past decade was mange. Mange is a skin mite that when it infects a kit fox, if a kit fox does not receive treatment within 3 months, it's dead. And so this skin mite moved through the urban population of kit foxes like wildfire, because kit foxes, they live in dens with other kit foxes. They're in contact with other kit foxes, and they were just passing these mites to other foxes. And it just almost wiped out the complete population here. The ones out in the hills, away from the urban environment, those foxes were fine because they exist at a lower density. They don't come into contact with as many other foxes. But here in the urban environment, where the density of foxes is high, it really crushed their populations, really crushed them. But the last 2-3 years, we're seeing their numbers come back. In fact, we're seeing more foxes now than we've seen in the past, I think, 9 years. And so we have here on campus, we have 2 dens where pups were produced, and they're doing quite well. Hopefully they all do really well, but it's tough when your campus is surrounded by roads, and a lot of these pups are going to want to move off campus, and unfortunately vehicles are going to probably take their fair share of them. Biggest mortality. So for kit foxes in general, coyotes are their biggest mortality source. In the urban environment, vehicles are their biggest mortality source. And so be careful on the roads, especially at night. Let's see, Sarah says, considering that the footage is black and white, how would you differentiate between fox species that look very similar? That is a very excellent question. So yes, black and white footage, how the heck do you tell? Now, that's when we look at some other possible indicators. So red fox is going to be about twice the size of a kit fox. And so you get a general idea of size on the pictures. Red foxes also have those black booties and white tip tail. And so those both appear in black and white footage. Your gray fox is tougher. That one's really hard to tell it's hard to tell a gray fox from a kit fox because they're both similarly sized. They both have similar fur patterns. They both have black tip tails, but that gray fox has that strong black line down the top of its tail. And so usually if you get a glimpse of the tail, you can identify whether or not it's a gray fox or not. Without the tail, it might be a little tougher. And something else, though, after having looked at thousands of pictures of kit foxes tend to have slightly larger ears and longer muzzles than the gray fox does. Let's see, Michael asks, is canine distemper a significant issue with kit foxes? Canine distemper can be, and it has been, particularly back in the 60s and 70s. And periodically, if canine distemper starts kind of running amok, especially in an urban environment, it can be. Doesn't seem to be a problem at this point, but canine distemper almost caused the Catalina Island fox to go extinct. Canine distemper went just mowed through their population. And so they're getting routinely, I was just at Catalina Island earlier this week talking about foxes with folks out there, and they do annual vaccine programs with, you guys thought we were the only ones getting shots in the arms. The foxes out there on the islands are getting canine distemper shots every year to prevent them from getting sick and dying, unfortunately. Let's see. Glad to hear the foxes are doing better. Yep, me too. Student says, how do you think global climate change might affect the different species abundances over time, especially since some are very tolerant to intense heat and low moisture? It's a very good question. There is a paper, in fact, that I just reviewed for a journal and hopefully it gets published pretty soon. It was looking at here in the Mojave Desert and the Central Valley, it was looking at how drought affects carnivore abundance and carnivore interactions with other carnivores. And what they're finding is that during drought years, more carnivores move into the urban environment. And so if we were to fast forward a little bit here in Bakersfield, if we have further increased drought, what the data from this paper are showing is that we might have more of these carnivores moving in. Like, we have very few coyotes in our urban environment here. We pretty much have no bobcats. We have pretty much no badgers and very few gray foxes and red foxes. But if things get tight outside of town in terms of water, then the data are predicting that they might move into this urban environment, which is going to make it a lot tougher for the kit fox. Really good question. Really good question. All right, I think, are there any other questions? Oh, here we go. Do you think that eradicating the squirrels on campus will negatively affect the kit foxes at CSUB? I think complete eradication of squirrels on campus would impact the kit foxes here at CSUB. A complete eradication. Because there is, I mean, I've seen with my own eyes, kit foxes with squirrels hanging out of their mouths. And so they're obviously using them. They're part of their diet. And so complete eradication, yes. However, right now we do seem to be in a squirrel population boom. There are a lot of them, and especially with young of the year squirrels that are running around trying to figure life out. There are a tremendous amount of squirrels that I think it might be a little safe to maybe work with some of those numbers and reduce those populations a little bit, but complete eradication, probably not the smartest move. Any other questions?
All right, I think that about does it. I will go ahead and see if I can allow others to unmute in case there are any other questions. Let's see if I can do that. Allow participants to unmute themselves so they can do that. So if you were not able to enter a chat question and you have one, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it. Hearing none, well, thank you, Dr. Hall, for your time today and for sharing your knowledge with us. Museum would love to have you come back again soon. And before we go, I would just like to mention again that if you enjoyed today's event, please consider making a donation at buenavistamuseum.org/donate. Your generosity is what makes events like this possible. Thanks again to everyone for coming, and please keep an eye on our website for the next Meet the Expert event and other events like this. Thank you to everyone.
Yes, thank you.